Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a place where childlike wonder gets traded for greasy machines, coal-stained lungs, and bread that's legally a choking hazard. Welcome to industrial Britain, where you're 9 years old and somehow already have more job experience than most interns. You're curled in a fetal question mark on a shared straw mattress, half asleep and half mildewed. The air smells like a mix of soot, boiled cabbage, and someone else's feet. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, is everything in this room, including the cockroaches. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. Let's see who's up too late with me. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun. Not that the sun matters. It's too busy hiding behind a thick industrial fog. The kind that looks like smoke and smells like last week's regrets. Your bed is a bundle of old rags and moldy straw on a floor shared by 4 other siblings, plus one cousin who just sort of appeared. You pull your blanket around you, which is really just a grain sack with dreams. It's damp, because of course it is. The wall next to you is sweating. You're not sure why, but it's been doing that since August. Privacy? You've read about it in a newspaper fragment. Once then used that fragment as toilet paper. You sit up and immediately regret it. Your back makes the sound of uncooked rice cracking. You're 9 years old, but your spine feels 90. You crawl around a sleeping sibling, a chamber pot, and something unidentifiable but definitely alive. The room smells like cabbage, coal dust, and boiled misery. You open the door to the hallway, where a neighbor is already yelling about something involving a lost sock and probable theft. Outside, the tenement is a tall brick rectangle of sorrow. The windows have more cracks than glass. You peek outside just in time to hear the factory bell ring a metal scream across the skyline. That means you have exactly 6 minutes to transform into a semi-functional cog in someone else's money machine. You throw on your work clothes, which is just a more tattered version of your sleep clothes. It's one outfit to rule them all: threadbare trousers, a too big shirt, and shoes that used to have soles. They slap against the floor with a wet sound, and for a moment you consider pretending to be sick. But then you remember the last time you did that. And the cure was being dunked in cold water and sent to work anyway, because at least now you're clean. Historians still argue whether early industrial child labor reforms were driven by public outcry or the fear that dead children made bad PR. Either way, you're pretty sure no one's rescuing you today. As you step out into the street, the city greets you like an angry landlord. The air is made of smoke and secrets. The sun is still hiding, probably embarrassed. The road is mud and soot, and the occasional rat dragging someone's breakfast. You're one of thousands of factory children, each shuffling toward a day filled with repetitive motion and mechanical growling. You sigh. It's still only 6:07 a.m. Welcome to your life. You step into the alley, careful not to slip on the thick paste of coal dust and yesterday's soup runoff. It's technically morning, but the sky hasn't decided if it's going to participate today. Your stomach growls a sad, hollow rattle like someone shaking an empty tin. Breakfast is theoretically included with life, but not with yours. You pass the baker's window, where the scent of fresh loaves floats just long enough to remind you you're not getting any. Even the air here seems reserved for a higher class. You fish a piece of cold potato from your pocket, leftovers from last night's dinner/family meeting, pop it into your mouth. It tastes like ash and defeat. Your commute is a wet cobblestone obstacle course. Horse dung, mysterious puddles, the occasional chicken. By the time you reach the factory gates, you've been splashed 3 times and insulted twice, once by an adult. Once by a parrot in a shop window. The factory itself is a soot-covered fortress its windows blinking awake with the flicker of gas lamps. You join the growing herd of kids, most still half asleep. Some cough like they've swallowed a fireplace. Some are barefoot, their feet red and raw from the cold stone. Everyone's eyes have that dull glaze, like undercooked potatoes. There's no talking unless it's absolutely necessary. You save energy where you can. The foreman greets you with a grunt and a hand gesture that might mean go in or go die. You obey either way. Inside, the world shifts into gears. The looms, the belts, the wheels they're already turning. The floor is slick. The walls are trembling. Sound is a living creature. 1,000 iron beasts screaming in perfect disharmony. The machines loom over you like parents. You can't disappoint because they don't know you exist. Your job is to crawl under the looms, collecting bits of cotton that fall between the gears. You're not allowed to stop the machine. If it grabs your sleeve, it takes your sleeve. If it grabs your hand. Well, there's a boy named Ollie who used to work in your station. Emphasis on used to. He's now a cautionary tale with 3 fingers and a seat by the window. One historical fact: British Parliament eventually passed the Factory Act of 1833 to limit child labor. But spoiler alert, most employers just ignored it, like a politely worded sign at a buffet. You get on your hands and knees. The floor is colder than your bed. Somehow, the cotton scraps cling to your fingers, your clothes, your lungs. You try not to sneeze? You're pretty sure sneezing counts as rebellion here. Lunch break arrives after what feels like 16 years. You don't get a full hour. You get 22 minutes and a brick wall to lean against. You pull out your meal, a crust of bread, so hard you could file weapons with it. A girl named Annie is crying quietly. She's 6 and still hasn't figured out how to time her blinks so the cotton doesn't sting. One boy shares a boiled turnip with his little sister, carving it into halves like it's a roast chicken. It's both sweet and tragic, which is basically the Victorian mood board. There's a rumor the boss's son once ate a beef pie for lunch. No one's sure if the pie existed or if it's just a folktale, like unicorns or affordable rent. Historians still argue whether child labor was seen as a moral failing or just a necessary evil in an age where ethics were out of stock. All you know is your legs are numb, your fingers sting, and it's only halfway through the day. Back inside, the machines seem louder. The air is soupier. A belt snaps somewhere across the floor, and the noise makes everyone flinch like trained animals. Someone whispers a prayer, and it's unclear if it's for safety or for the day to end. But the day doesn't end. Not yet. The whistle finally blows, though calling it a whistle is generous. It's more of a banshee shriek filtered through rust and desperation. Your body reacts before your mind does, and you're already moving toward the one place less inviting than the factory floor, the lavatories. Except, calling them lavatories also gives them too much dignity. What you're actually heading toward is a wooden shack bolted to the outer wall, shared by approximately 80 people and 4 million flies. No running water, no doors, just the comforting knowledge that someone else was definitely here before you, and they left their full opinion behind. You wait in line, trying to breathe through your mouth. Not that it helps. Your breath just picks up the flavor of the air, a rich cocktail of mildew. Rot. And ammonia with a top note of despair. Someone behind you mutters, "Should have gone in the gutter." Someone ahead of you is crying quietly again. It's always a different someone. When it's finally your turn, you step into the tiny cubicle and discover it's less a room and more of an existential riddle. How can a bucket feel both full and endless? The seat is a plank. The walls are etched with initials, messages, crude doodles, and warnings like, "Watch for splinters." "Toilet paper, please." That's a fairy tale. Here, you're lucky to find newspaper. And if you do, you read it first. because you might not get another chance to see what's happening in 1872. Spoiler still bad, if you're really unlucky. The paper's already been used for both purposes. You exit the stall, a changed person. You're not sure if it's the smell or the moral injury, but something inside you has definitely shifted. Maybe it's your soul. Maybe it's your immune system. You go to the outdoor pump to wash your hands, which mostly involves splashing yourself with frigid water from a spigot that wheezes like it has bronchitis. Soap? Oh, sweetheart. Soap is what the rich use. You just rub your hands together and hope for divine forgiveness. Historically, public sanitation during the Victorian boom was, how should we put this, experimental. London's population had exploded, but infrastructure stayed back in the Middle Ages. The result? A city designed like a maze but plumbed like a swamp. The term Gardyloo comes back to you. It was once yelled from windows before someone dumped a chamber pot onto the street below. Kind of like yelling heads up before hurling a flaming bowling ball. It was considered courteous. Scholars still argue whether the communal filth was simply accepted as normal or deliberately ignored in the name of progress. After all, nothing says empire like colonizing half the globe while your own citizens poop in buckets. One quirky truth: some wealthy Victorians installed elaborate indoor toilets with velvet curtains and gold trim. That's still flushed directly into the Thames. It's a bit like buying a silk-lined trash can, still a trash can. You head back to your station, nose still twitching. The factory hasn't gotten any cleaner in your absence, if anything. It now smells faintly of overcooked cabbage, engine oil, and the ghost of industrial dreams. It's as if someone tried to perfume a haunted radiator. You settle back under the machines. Your hands work on autopilot. Your mind, however, is occupied. You're trying not to think about the fact that if you have to go again, you'll have to go back. And every visit raises your risk of typhoid, cholera, or just pure existential collapse. Remember earlier when someone said should have gone in the gutter? They weren't joking. You feel a sudden sympathy for rats. At least they can leave whenever they want. You sit cross-legged on the dirt floor, staring at a bowl that could generously be described as food. Welcome to your daily despair breakfast. Lunch and dinner all revolve around one exquisite culinary creation: pottage. It's not porridge. No. Porridge is a privilege. This is a grayish, gluey slop of root vegetables that may have once known sunlight, but now tastes like regret. If you're lucky, there's a chunk of turnip. If you're really lucky, it's not already moving. You dip your spoon, actually a wooden shard from a cracked ladle, and take a mouthful. It's warm, and that's the best thing that can be said. Salt, that's for kings. Pepper, don't even whisper the word. Every bite is a lesson in humility. And the occasional crunch of grit is the universe's way of reminding you this isn't overcooked. It's underwashed. Bread is your side dish. If by bread, you mean something that could stop a small arrow. It's dense, stale, and may include a mystery mix of barley, sawdust, and despair. You gnaw on it like a determined squirrel, breaking off crumbs that mostly feed the rats beneath your bed. Some loaves are cheated, fluffed up with chalk or ground tree bark to make them weigh more. Yes, you get more bread. No, your intestines are not grateful. Now, drinks, you reach for water, just kidding. You're not trying to die today. The water from the nearby stream is a bouquet of bacteria and possibly someone else's bad decision upstream. So you drink small beer. Not to get drunk though, who could blame you, but because it's safer. Low alcohol. Watery, mildly fermented. It's the 14th century version of kombucha, except this won't be sold for $9 at a farmer's market. Meat is a fantasy. On feast days, you might smell it roasting in the Lord's manor, sweet fat dripping into flames, spices perfuming the wind like betrayal. You inhale deeply. That's your portion. Smell it, remember it. Now go back to your boiled cabbage. Historians still argue whether commoners got more meat during wartime spoils from plundering or less because armies took it all. Either way, you're not in the army. So guess what? You're still chewing on a potato like it's a steak. And forget about dessert. Sugar is for the monks and monarchs. You sometimes dream of honey, but the bees won't cooperate. So you might gnaw on a carrot or nibble some wild sorrel, a noble snack, if you enjoy bitterness and disappointment. Fringe fact: some medieval Europeans believed that too much food made the soul heavy and less holy, which is lucky, because nothing about your life is excessive, except maybe your daily ration of hunger. As you finish your bowl, you scrape the last bit from the edges with a finger. Doesn't help. The hunger isn't gone. It's just quieter for a few hours, like a cat watching from a distance, waiting to pounce again. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve. There's no napkin. And move on with your day, or at least what's left of it. Clothing. In this glorious age of soot and soot-flavored porridge is a thing of legends. You wear exactly one outfit, not per week, not per season. One outfit, forever. It is a tattered tunic made of wool, so coarse it could exfoliate bark. There's no tag that reads machine washable because, spoiler alert, there's no machine, and also no washing. Your shirt brownish gray from dirt. Not dye scratches your skin with each step. The sleeves, once long, now dangle at mismatched lengths, and the armpits gave up somewhere around last winter. Underwear. Charming question. You don't have the luxury of layered modesty. Your trousers are patched and repatched, then tied up with a bit of string that might have once been a shoelace. And speaking of shoes, you either don't have them, or they are stiff leather lumps that leak water, raise blisters, and emit a noise best described as medieval squelch. Laundry, technically, yes. Practically, no. Washing clothes in the Victorian underclass means hauling water from the communal pump, boiling it with ash or animal fat, then scrubbing your one outfit by hand with a brick-like bar of lye. The water may freeze in winter, scald in summer, and either way, you risk breaking your fingers off in the process. Most families clean their clothes by beating them with sticks. Spoiler, it mostly just makes the clothes angry. Lice and fleas constant companions. At some point, you stop swatting and name them. You scratch your neck and feel a parade of tiny feet doing the cha-cha down your back. The seams of your clothing are home to entire insect ecosystems. You learn to live in harmony or mutual tolerance with creatures that snack on your scalp like it's a tavern buffet. And the smell. Oh, you smell like someone who shares a mattress with 4 siblings, hasn't bathed in 3 weeks, and had to crawl through a coal chute yesterday. Because you did. The air around you has a texture now. People don't avoid you out of rudeness. It's self-preservation. Historians still argue whether Victorian public health reforms were prompted more by rising disease or simply a desire to breathe again. You look longingly at the upper classes. Their clothes may not be that much cleaner, but at least they have buttons and possibly pockets. Meanwhile, you sew yours shut to keep the rats from nesting in them. Rich children wear frilly cotton with stiff collars and absurd hats. You wear a sack with armholes. A quirky tidbit: Victorian girls often wore pantalettes frilly, calf-length underwear to preserve modesty. But in working-class homes, modesty got run over by practicality and then thrown out the window. Many children ran about barefoot and half-dressed until they were old enough to be clothed in something vaguely resembling trousers or a dress. The seasons only make it worse. In summer, your clothes trap heat and soak up sweat until you're basically a walking sponge. In winter, the same clothes fail spectacularly to keep you warm. Wet wool turns to ice. You don't so much wear clothes as experience them viscerally, constantly, and usually with chattering teeth. You try not to think about what's crawling on you. You try not to itch. You definitely try not to compare yourself to a damp hay bale with a personality. Because hay bales don't have to work 14 hours a day in the same outfit they sleep. Sweat and sneeze in, teeth. You still have a few, technically, but each one feels like a tiny, cursed monument to a world that doesn't believe in dentistry. You wake up with that familiar ache again, a dull, throbbing rhythm from the side of your jaw that's been swelling for days. There's no toothbrush, no minty toothpaste, no floss. There's only your tongue poking at the rough cavern where a molar used to be, and the slow realization that you're basically chewing with broken bricks. You don't clean your teeth because, well, what would you clean them with? A twig? A crust of yesterday's bread? The answer, historically, was often nothing. Dental hygiene in this industrial age is mostly folklore and desperate guesses. People might rub ashes on their gums or chew fennel seeds to freshen their breath, though nothing freshens a gaping. Infected socket. Your gums are swollen and red. Every bite is an ordeal. You avoid hot food, cold food, and honestly, food. That one blackened tooth feels like it's trying to crawl out of your skull on its own schedule. And if it doesn't, don't worry, someone can help you with that. There's always the local blacksmith's pliers, or your drunk uncle with a shoelace and a door. Tooth pain is not just unpleasant, it's incapacitating. It spreads upward to your head, down through your neck. And infections don't stay in one place. If your luck is bad enough, and spoiler, it often is, a single bad tooth can turn into a lethal abscess. People in this time don't just suffer toothaches, they die from them. Medical science hasn't really arrived yet. There's no understanding of bacteria. Germ theory is still considered a maybe by those wacky fringe thinkers. You've got two options when your toothache hits critical bloodletting. Or leeches. Neither of which will fix the problem. But hey, at least it'll distract you. Historians still argue whether the average industrial child ever had a full set of teeth past the age of 15. It's hard to know, since so many mouths were wrecked early on by sugarless diets, but also by hard, gritty bread. You remember that bread so dense it can deflect arrows? Turns out, it also makes a fantastic dental demolition tool. Sometimes the adults in your house tell you to rinse with gin. Not because it disinfects, though it might, but because it numbs. You sit in the corner, with a rag pressed to your cheek, sipping cheap alcohol, trying not to cry. And no one blames you. Because if crying could fix dental agony, this whole city would sound like a haunted orphanage. You envy the people with wooden dentures. Yes, wooden, as in actual blocks, carved to resemble molars. Not that they're functional, they're more for show, like a tuxedo made of splinters. And if you think rich people have it easier, well, sort of. They have access to early dentists. But those are the same men who consider mercury an acceptable cure for just about anything, including insanity and syphilis. And let's not forget the occasional case of public tooth pulling, a kind of entertainment meets horror genre, where some self-proclaimed healer yanks molars out of screaming mouths in the middle of town squares. Sometimes. They offer a free show? Sometimes. You pay them, either way. You lose something. Still, every time your mouth pulses with pain, you just wish it would all fall out at once. Clean slate? Toothless. Maybe. But at least you could sleep. You dream about smooth soup? Lukewarm. With no texture, just liquid comfort. No chewing, no biting, just quiet. And then someone shakes you awake for the morning shift. The ache is still there. Always. You trudge to work, still clutching your jaw. And the cold air presses against your swollen cheek like a slap from reality. There's no time for rest, no allowance for sick days, and absolutely no sympathy for pain. Because this is Victorian industrial labor, and you, a child, are just one more cog in a machine that doesn't sleep, eat properly, or care whether your fingers are still attached. You begin your day before the sun dares to rise. Not because you're an early bird, but because the factory whistle is your alarm clock. You shuffle toward the mill, eyes half closed, body aching from a previous day's shift that never truly ended. If you're lucky, you had 4 hours of sleep on a flea-infested mattress. If you're really lucky, you're still alive Several kids aren't. Their names don't get memorials. They just stop showing up. Your job might involve crawling under massive machines to collect loose cotton scraps. It sounds gentle until you realize that one mistimed movement can mean a crushed skull or lost limb. There's a reason you're hired. Your small hands fit into places grown-ups wouldn't dare go. And if your sleeve gets caught, don't worry. They'll replace you by lunchtime. A mainstream historical fact. By 1833, British law technically limited children to a 48-hour workweek. That sounds nice on paper. In practice, enforcement was about as solid as soggy toast. Factories simply falsified records or claimed kids were apprentices, not laborers. There's a popular fringe theory that children in factories were more disciplined and stronger because of their early exposure to hardship. That might be true if you think strong means being able to keep working while your feet bleed into your socks. One boy near you has lost 3 toes. He limps on the factory floor like it's normal, because here it is. The air inside the factory is thick with dust and cotton lint, so much so that every breath feels like inhaling a pillow. Lungs fill with fibers. Historians still argue whether this early exposure to textile particles permanently damaged respiratory development. Spoiler alert, probably. But who's counting? Certainly not the overseers, who are more concerned about looms breaking than lungs collapsing. You're always watched. Always. An adult with a whip or a stick patrols the aisles, barking at slow hands or dreamy stares. One moment of inattention, and you'll be punished, not just yelled at, but smacked, or fined, or both. If you break a thread, they deduct your pay. If you sneeze too much, they might just fire you. Victorian capitalism doesn't care about immune systems. Lunch, if it arrives, is 15 minutes with a bit of bread and possibly cold porridge. You sit on the steps outside, staring blankly at other kids who look just like you, skinny, tired, and prematurely aged. It's hard to tell if you're 8 or 40. Everyone here has the same bent spine and haunted eyes. Some factories employ piecers kids whose only job is to lean dangerously close to spinning machines to mend broken threads. You hear of one girl whose hair got caught and pulled her face into the gears. The manager gave her family a small compensation, 2 shillings and a loaf of bread. A generous offer, they said, a replacement cost. And just when you think it's over, they're still cleaning. After your shift, they might ask you to sweep, which is to say crawl through the factory's underfloor crawl spaces, coughing, gagging, and inhaling decades of grime. On Sundays, you don't rest. You do laundry, or beg, or help your mother pick rags from the gutters to resell. You don't go to school unless it's a charity-run one that teaches you to spell obedience before freedom. You sleep in snatches, between coughs. You dream of warmth. You wake to more work. And so it goes. You're starting to think the factory isn't your worst enemy. It's the sky. The weather is less a backdrop and more a full-time bully, unrelenting, moody, and oddly personal. In the Victorian slums, weather is a personality trait, and it's not a nice one. It's the coworker who breathes loudly, never bathes, and still expects a seat at dinner. Winter creeps in first, not gracefully, but like a drunk uncle who kicks the door open and makes everything cold and damp just by standing there. Your clothes, which you haven't changed in a month, are damp before you even leave the bed. That is, if you can call your lice-laced pile of straw a bed. You sleep in a corner of a shared one-room flat with 7 other bodies and 0 insulation. No heating means creativity. You curl up beside your little sister, both of you wrapped in whatever rags remain dry. Some families burn scraps of wood, coal dust, or when things get really desperate, old shoes. The scent is unique, like sadness baked into leather. Historians still argue whether the so-called chimney smoke culture of the industrial slums contributed more to lung disease than factory work itself. Spoiler again, double damage. Morning is an ice bath without the bath. You dress in stiff garments that have frozen overnight. Your boots, if you even have them, crunch with frost on the inside. You shuffle outside, breath steaming, nose dripping, hands already numb. It's 6 a.m., and your toes are waging quiet war against amputation. Then comes summer, but don't cheer yet. Victorian summer is a furnace with flies. Air doesn't circulate. Heat rises, settles, and waits. Your house turns into a brick oven. No fans, no open windows. Because the outside smells like boiling sewage. And the inside, well, you've got 7 humans producing enough sweat to keep the air thick and sour. The factory doesn't cool down either. Its machines hum louder. The cotton dust clings to your wet skin. You sweat through your clothes before your shift even starts. The air tastes like metal and misery. You gulp it down because there's nothing else. And then the insects come. Flies, mosquitoes, fleas. They're not just annoying, they're omnipresent. They own this world now. They bite in shifts. Your skin itches all day, all night. Some kids have infected bites that swell to grotesque little bubbles of red and pus. You don't even look anymore. It's just normal now. Rain isn't relief, it's an excuse for the entire street to transform into one long, squishy, bacteria-rich soup. The mud clings to your feet like it's hungry. The gutters overflow and back up, turning corners into cesspools. And remember sewage systems? Oh, no. You're still in the dump, the waste out the window phase of human innovation. And gravity does not care about social class. A mainstream fact. By mid-19th century, Victorian London's notorious Great Stink forced Parliament to finally address the city's primitive waste management. But long before that, people like you were already nose deep in it. Your clothes offer zero help. In summer, they trap heat. In winter, they invite frostbite. They're rarely washed, and when they are, it's in brown water swirled in a bucket. No soap, just hope. You hang them on a line, pray for sun, and pretend that mold is a design pattern. Some believe that enduring harsh weather builds character, but in your case, it mostly builds calluses, colds, and creative cursing under your breath. You once tried to catch a snowflake on your tongue. It tasted like chimney soot. You've never tried again. And now you're thirsty. But in Victorian England, thirst is not something you satisfy. It's something you negotiate with. Water, you learn, is both sacred and suspicious. It might be clean, or it might kill you slowly in 3 days with something the newspapers call summer complaint, and your mother just calls bad luck. You wake up parched. Your lips are cracked, your throat is dry, and there's a metal taste in your mouth from all the coal smoke you've swallowed overnight. There's a bucket by the door. The water in it is cloudy. You drink it anyway, because, well, choices are a luxury. Clean drinking water is a modern invention. In your world, it's a rumor. Most of what you get is river water, collected downstream from someone else's laundry. Or worse, their chamber pot. There's a pump on the corner that people claim is safer. But half your street got cholera last spring, and they all drank from that pump. Historians still argue whether it was the pump itself or the overflowing cesspit beside it that caused the outbreak. Either way, you now call it death spout in your head. Bathing is theoretically good for you, but in practice, dangerous. The current theory is that water opens your pores and lets in disease. Doctors of the time, armed with more confidence than knowledge, warn that too much bathing weakens your constitution. They recommend you clean yourself with a dry brush, or, if you must, with cold water and a firm sense of shame. Once a month, your mother boils a giant kettle and you get the family bath. Not a bath each. One bath. You all use the same water. Eldest first, baby last. By the time it's your turn, the water resembles weak tea brewed with dirt and despair. The soap, if any, is homemade and smells like lard and onions. You lower yourself in and try not to touch the bottom. There's something sticky down there. You don't ask. You just pretend you're a fancy person from a Dickens novel who owns a towel. And then there's laundry. Your one set of clothes is stiff with grime. But water is too precious to waste on fabric. You try to scrub a shirt in a pan, but it's like washing hope out of concrete. You wring it, hang it, and by the next morning, it smells slightly better than a foot, but worse than a foot, that's ever known joy. Water spreads disease just as well as it tries to stop it. Typhoid, dysentery, and cholera lurk in every drop. You've known more than one child to vanish from school for a week, then never return. No explanation. Just an empty desk and a mother with hollow eyes. One fringe tale from your uncle: if you stir water counterclockwise while chanting Psalm 91, it's supposed to bind the devil in the pipes. He says it worked in 1847. Or maybe that was just the week it rained a lot. You try it anyway. Public baths exist. Sort of. Men and women in separate schedules, each paying a few pence to sit in steamy rooms that smell like 400 wet socks. You've never been too poor, too ashamed, too worried you'll catch something worse than what you went in with. Some theorists claim people in the Victorian era were cleaner than we give them credit for. They cite perfume, hair pomade, and vinegar rinses. But none of that stops the fact that every street smells like boiled cabbage and sadness. You grow used to it. The way you grow used to cold feet or hunger pangs. The irony of it all: rain is constant. Floods happen, streets drown, but none of it is clean enough to drink. It's nature's joke, and you're the punchline. And every time you cup your hands to drink, you ask yourself, is this the sip that ends me, or the one that gets me to another morning? Either way, it's lukewarm, and that might be the worst part. So now you're cleanish, or at least no longer visibly caked in grime, and tucked into the same straw pile that greeted you hours before. The factory whistle is silent. For now, the air is still, save for the occasional creak of wood or the distant slosh of boots in the mud outside. Your body aches, not like sore muscles, but like it's trying to leave you in protest. But there's peace, in a strange way, the kind of numb stillness only exhaustion can buy. Outside, the gaslights flicker. Inside, your chest rises slowly, with breaths that sound just a little less ragged than the day before. Tomorrow will be the same. The water still won't be clean. The food still won't taste right. And the boots will still leak. But for now, for just a few minutes more, it's quiet. So let your eyes close, gently. Let the shadows melt into silence. You've done enough. You've survived again. And in this world, that's almost a miracle. Good night. Sleep tight. And if the lice don't bite, well, that would be a first. And here's the real paradox for a man who weaponized a Ryder truck. His last moments were aggressively soft. No steak, no tobacco. No biblical quoting at the dinner table, just scoops of mass-produced ice cream. Made in a factory he would have detested for its government subsidies. You watch the fries cool. They're not salted, not dipped, not even crisp. These are end-of-shift fries, the kind that feel like punishment even on a good day. And still, he eats them, slowly, deliberately, as if every bite might make this place feel less like a holding pen and more like a corner booth. No one speaks. The TV in the background hums faintly. With a baseball game, no one's watching. You almost expect a waitress to ask if he wants ketchup. But this isn't a diner. It's Terre Haute Penitentiary. And the next course is silence. There's a small pile of napkins. He doesn't use them. The ice cream drips a little onto the tray, green against gray. Mint chip, a flavor that tries so hard to be refreshing, but still ends up tasting vaguely like toothpaste and regret. You wonder if he picked it as a joke. You hope it was a joke. The alternative is much sadder. And just when you think he might say something, offer a quote, a curse, or a crumb of remorse, he leans back, pushes the tray forward, and says, "I'm done." It's the quietest rebellion you've ever seen. Not a bang, not even a whimper, just an empty container and a satisfied sigh. A fringe detail floats into your head. Some say he didn't even eat the fries, just stared at them, let them get cold while the ice cream disappeared. A last act of control, or perhaps indigestion. You'll never know. The official report is clinical, but the memory of that minty green lingers in your nostrils, haunting in its mundanity, and you can't help but marvel at the absurdity of it. All lives ended, stories closed, systems flexed, and in the middle of it, ice cream. Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe history isn't just made of declarations and revolutions. Maybe it's also made of fries that never get eaten, and dessert that melts too fast. Now you slide back another half-century to the sepia-toned sorrow of 1936. Spain. Civil war paints the air with smoke and slogans. And in a prison cell in Granada, a poet waits for a bullet. His name is Federico Garcia Lorca, and his last request, a glass of cold water. Yes, that's it. No lavish banquet. No ironic nod to mortality. Just water. Something that half the world doesn't think twice about, and the other half would die for. He might as well have asked for silence or dignity. The guards grant it. Maybe they're surprised. Maybe they're grateful not to fetch foie gras for once. And maybe, just maybe, they realize the absurd weight of a poet asking for water before being shot, like a soldier without a uniform. Because Garcia Lorca wasn't a warrior. He was a playwright with a knack for metaphors and a very inconvenient political alignment. Historians still argue whether Lorca was killed for being a Republican, a homosexual, or simply too poetic for fascism. Some even question whether he was offered a final meal at all. But the cold water remains the dominant whisper in every version of the story. Chilling, pure, almost saintly, and probably served in a cup that hadn't been washed properly. You sip it with him. Now your fingers wrapped around something chipped and smudged with a century's worth of fingerprints. The water isn't bottled or filtered or smart. It's from a well that tastes faintly of limestone and secrets. Still, it cools your throat like a whispered goodbye. And then comes the part no one puts on plaques. They took him to a field. Not a stage, not a courtroom, just dry soil and indifferent wind. No audience, no curtain, just gravity. And before the shots rang out, one of the guards, perhaps the same one who fetched the water, mumbled something about how this wasn't personal. As if murder can ever be an administrative decision. You stand there. The empty glass still damp in your hand. The air doesn't move. Lorca doesn't scream. He doesn't run. He just stands. Because that's what poets do. They stand. And then they fall. Later, rumors spread that he sang. Others say he recited lines from his own work. Most likely, he said nothing. Because you don't need language when the story's already over. A fringe tidbit emerges, drifting like dandelion fluff. Into the margins of history, someone claimed Lorca's ghost haunted the field where he died, searching for his unpublished pages. More likely, it just wanted his glass back, or his name cleared, and there you are standing in the dust beside a man who could summon entire worlds with rhythm and metaphor, and who chose as his final indulgence hydration. It's tragically poetic. Cold irony in liquid form. The most basic element of life. Served moments before death. No garnish required. And as your own lips dry in sympathy, you realize the terrible beauty of that choice. No salt, no sugar, no comfort food. Just clarity. And the hope that someone, somewhere, would remember how pure things used to be. And now you're in Illinois, 1931. The wind is sharp enough to slice bread, but it never gets the chance because the man sitting down for his final meal isn't interested in sliced bread. He wants fried chicken, fried potatoes, fried everything, really. It's the culinary equivalent of going out in a blaze of cholesterol. His name, a rather famous one. Albert Fish? Yes. The man whose crimes you definitely won't Google at night. Tonight, we are not here to discuss those grim details. We're here to note the eerie contrast between someone unspeakable and his very speakable appetite. Fish requests a meal so blandly American it's almost patriotic. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, lettuce with a little salad dressing, a single slice of pie. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he was preparing for Sunday supper, not a high-voltage send-off. The tray is slid into his cell with the polite indifference of someone who has learned not to ask questions. A paper napkin likely too thin to blot anything but dignity rests beside the plate. And you, always the invisible observer, watch as he lifts a drumstick to his lips, slowly, gratefully, like this is the best part of his day, or the only part of his day that doesn't scream. Historians still argue whether this meal was truly finished. Some say Fish devoured every last bite, licking his fingers with unsettling joy. Others suggest he left the pie untouched, as if sugar was too sweet a goodbye for a man so steeped in bitterness. There's no photo, just records, just words, and none of them taste like mashed potatoes. A quirky detail, he reportedly carried with him the x-rays showing the dozens of needles he had inserted into his own body over time. Yes, while you wince at paper cuts, this man treated his flesh like a pincushion. So the next time you hesitate over a flu shot, remember Albert Fish would have asked for seconds. You sit beside him now, in that quiet, grim dining room. There's no candlelight, just a flickering bulb and the faint hum of electricity being tested behind the walls. The switch waits nearby, impersonal, impatient. And as Fish chews his last bites, you notice something strangely serene. Not joy, not remorse, just routine. Like he's done this 1,000 times before, just never with a countdown clock above his head. One final joke, despite everything. He apparently thanked the warden for the food. It was good, he muttered, as if he'd just finished a tasting menu instead of a death row meal. Because etiquette, you see, doesn't die with morality. Sometimes it lingers, awkwardly, like parsley on a plate. And there you are, frozen in the stillness of this moment. A man of nightmares eating comfort food. And you can't decide what's more disturbing, the crimes that came before, or the calm that came after. Either way, the chicken is gone, and so is the man. And now, fast forward to 1946, a drab cell in Missouri. There's no music, no curtain call, just a fork scraping a metal tray, and a man named Willie Francis staring down at a cheeseburger like it's the last friend he has. You may have never heard of him, but Willie's case changed history, or at least made it sweat. He was the teenager who survived his first execution. Yes, you heard that right. When Louisiana tried to fry him in 1945, the chair malfunctioned. The result, searing pain, short-circuited sparks, and one very alive prisoner. The next year, they tried again. So here sits Willie, 19 years old, still breathing, barely believing it. And this time, there's no faulty wire, no lucky coil. Just a cheeseburger, a milkshake, and a chocolate bar. A teenager's dream lunch, if you forget the context, and you can't forget the context. Historians still argue whether he chose this meal himself, or if the state provided a suggested menu, because nothing says freedom of choice like a court-mandated burger. Some even whisper that Willie asked for bubble gum, but was denied, apparently. Chewing would have interfered with the dignity of the procedure, because, as we all know, execution is a deeply formal occasion. He unwraps the burger slowly. His hands tremble not from fear, but from familiarity. He's done this before. Not the burger, the chair, and yet, the grease on the wax paper clings to his fingers like it knows what's coming. The milkshake vanilla, cold, sharp against the heat of the moment, goes down in slow sips. There's no rush. After all, if you were about to meet your maker, wouldn't you want dessert to linger? The chocolate bar is the quietest part. No crunch, just a slow melt. It sticks to his teeth, fills the gaps between panic and peace. It's not a feast. It's not a final act. It's a pause. A very long, very awkward pause between life and something else. You watch from the wall, invisible again. And you wonder, is he tasting joy? Or just trying to chew through time? Is this a moment of rebellion, sweetness in the face of state power? Or just a teen trying not to cry? No cameras, no fanfare, just sugar, meat, and inevitability. A quirky note, the electric chair was named Gruesome Gertie. Yes, that's real. They gave the chair a nickname, like it was the office water cooler. And Gruesome Gertie had a reputation temperamental, noisy, and, clearly, not always reliable. If you've ever had a kitchen appliance that shocks you for fun, you already know the vibe. So Willie eats, and breathes, and waits. Again. And as the tray is taken away, he looks at the wall like it owes him something. And maybe it does. Because how do you measure a second execution? In volts, in injustice, or in how many fries you get with your burger. The door creaks open. You hear the quiet shuffle of polished boots. And just like that, history resets the switch. But the flavor, that lingers. The year is 1963. The place is a quiet prison in Indiana. And the man waiting for his final meal is Victor Feguer. You probably haven't heard of him. Not exactly a household name like Capone or Dillinger, but Victor holds one uncomfortable distinction. He was the last person executed by the federal government before a long hiatus. So yes, he gets a footnote in American history. And what does he ask for with that strange honor? A single olive, not a plate of olives, not an olive salad, just one solitary olive, with the pit still in it, no sides, no drink, no witty punchline. You can almost hear the kitchen staff stare at the request, wondering if it's a typo. But no, it's very real and very deliberate. You'd think this was a protest, a metaphor, a strange culinary riddle. And maybe it is. Historians still argue whether Victor chose the olive as a peace offering, a religious symbol, or simply because he wanted something small, natural, and lasting. Some even say he hoped the pit would sprout an olive tree inside his grave, a bizarre form of posthumous recycling. Poetic, yes. Practical, highly questionable, especially when you consider embalming fluid. As you stand silently in the corner of his sparse cell, the overhead light buzzing in bored anticipation. You watch him hold the olive between two fingers. He doesn't rush. He studies it. This is not a man savoring flavor. It's a moment of strange focus, as if the olive is more important than the execution itself. No cutlery, no tray, just hand to mouth. And the sound, barely a sound, is the soft pressure of teeth meeting something delicate and bitter. You half expect him to spit the pit in defiance. He doesn't. He swallows it whole. Imagine that your final act is planting a seed inside yourself. If that isn't commitment, what is? You want to laugh. It's absurd, but also kind of beautiful. Compared to other last meals loaded with gravy, guilt, and saturated fats, this is something entirely different. It's not indulgence, it's restraint. It's one man refusing to give the state even a bite more of himself. Literally. There's a long silence afterward, the kind where time feels too full and too empty at once. You wonder if he's still thinking about the olive, or if he's already moved on. Mentally halfway out the door. There's something both eerie and serene about the whole scene, like watching someone end a performance by blowing out a candle. The quirky part after Victor's execution. Newspapers actually reported the olive detail with mild confusion. And more than one kitchen table conversation across America that week ended with, why just one? It became his strange legacy. No crime headlines. Just Olive Man. You feel it now, the ritual, the weird poetry of it. No ketchup packets. No napkins. Just a man, a pit, and a silence that even history finds hard to fill. The guards don't talk. They've seen everything, but not this. And as he's led away, you imagine the pit inside him, the tiny, useless hope of life growing out of death. It's not realistic, but neither is the rest of this story, and that's what makes it stick. Now you shift again to a prison much warmer, much louder Huntsville, Texas, 1994. The fluorescent lights hum like they're chewing on the atmosphere, and the kitchen is busy prepping the final order of the night, a last meal for John Wayne Gacy. Yes, that Gacy. Clown by day, serial killer by night, and in death, one of the most indulgent diners on record. The list arrives on a crumpled notepad page, and it reads like a toddler's fantasy menu if the toddler had a cholesterol death wish. A bucket of KFC original recipe chicken, French fries, a pound of strawberries, and a dozen fried shrimp. All of it fried, all of it greasy, all of it oddly festive. There's something obscene about it, and not just the portion size. This is a man who committed unspeakable acts, now making choices like he's starring in a fast food commercial. You don't know whether to be horrified or just mildly bloated on his behalf. The kitchen doesn't flinch. They've seen stranger. They don't get paid to judge, they get paid to deep fry. And so, the smell of fried shrimp and spiced chicken starts to cling to the air like guilt. You can practically feel the grease coating your lungs. It's hard not to notice the juxtaposition, how someone so violent, so cruel, so calculated, can sit in the corner and dip fries into ketchup like it's just another Tuesday. He eats like a man without consequence. No nerves, no hesitation. In fact, it's his most human moment in years, which somehow makes it worse. Historians still argue whether last meals serve as a ritual of dignity or a grim joke played by the state. Is it kindness? Is it closure? Or is it just distraction? One last flavor before the silence for Gacy. It seems like spectacle, like he's curating his final performance, calorie by calorie. You watch the strawberry juice run down his wrist like fake blood. His mouth is red, his fingers are slick, and the fried chicken bones pile up like tiny femurs in a personal ossuary. It's grotesque, but in a weird way, it's also predictable. Gacy was always about excess of control, of ego, of destruction, and yet, part of you wonders, Why not just ask for one olive? The quirky tidbit he used to manage 3 KFC restaurants before his crimes were discovered. So in some ironic, full circle twist, he's eating the very thing he once sold to eager families, comfort food now served with a death warrant. It's the quiet that unsettles you. He doesn't say anything poetic. He doesn't reflect. He chews. He swallows. He wipes his fingers. Then he grins, because of course he does. The kind of grin that reminds you monsters don't always have fangs. Sometimes. They just need a wet nap. And when he's done, the tray is still full of crumbs. Sauces smeared like crime scenes across paper napkins. The guard picks it up. Nobody speaks. You leave the room, and your shoes stick faintly to the floor. Fried food always leaves something behind. Now, you cross the Atlantic again, but instead of the gallows or the gas chamber, this time it's the guillotine and the heavy velvet hush of a French prison cell in 1939. The name is Eugene Weidmann, a man with a face too handsome for his own good and crimes far uglier than his slick back hair. He's about to become the last person publicly executed in France. And fittingly, his final meal, a quiet contradiction lavish in its calm, modest in its flavors, eerie in its civility. No fried chicken, no strawberry juice, no publicity stunt, just roast chicken, a bottle of white wine, fresh bread, and a cigarette. Which, spoiler alert, is not part of any food group. But sure, call it dessert. You sit across from him now. The room smelling faintly of stone walls and candle smoke. The wine is poured into a plain ceramic cup. There is no silverware clinking, just soft chewing, and the occasional exhale of cigarette smoke that curls upward like a prayer nobody's answering. The roast chicken is golden, crisp-skinned, and surrounded by potatoes that still steam. You can tell it was cooked slowly, as if the kitchen staff believed in flavor more than fate. The bread is crusty and perfect. The kind of bread that laughs at supermarket loaves. And the wine light, smooth, unbothered. More French than anything should be, especially on the eve of decapitation. You wonder if this was mercy or mockery. Historians still argue whether French execution meals were intended as respectful rites or subtle punishments, reminders of what the condemned were leaving behind. After all, what is bread without tomorrow? What is chicken without seconds? Weidmann eats in silence. No theatrics, just small bites, chewed slowly, eyes lowered. The cigarette dangles from his lips like punctuation. He is calm, disturbingly calm. And when he finishes, he thanks the guard. That's all. Merci. And then something peculiar happens. The next morning, the crowd gathers in Versailles, buzzing like a marketplace, elbowing for the best view. Reporters, aristocrats, schoolboys. Everyone wants a look at history specifically, the kind that removes heads. A filmmaker even captures the scene on camera. Because, of course, 1939 needed one more reason to feel surreal. And when the blade falls, it's not just the man who is removed, it's the tradition. France, humiliated by its own spectacle, bans public executions the next day. They decide, in a moment of rare national clarity, that watching someone die shouldn't be a social event. It's the end of an era. And all it took was one calm chicken dinner and a little too much daylight. The fringe tidbit, Weidmann's execution, was so widely attended. People sold sandwiches nearby. That's right, execution-adjacent catering. You could die on camera while someone else chewed a baguette and commented on the lighting. And so, the guillotine is quietly moved indoors. The velvet curtain falls on public punishment. and the world moves on. But part of you still remembers that last dinner, the way the candle flickered, the way the bread cracked in half, the way the chicken smelled like something warm and alive, just before it wasn't. And you realize, for all our talk of justice, sometimes the final bite says more than the final words. Now we drift to 1963, where the echo of footsteps on linoleum leads to a room so quiet it could hear your guilt before you confessed. This is the execution chamber of the Texas State Penitentiary. The man is Joe Hill, not the famous labor activist, just a man with a borrowed name, a borrowed life, and a very Texan last meal. His request: a T-bone steak, fried chicken, French fries, and a Dr. Pepper. Because if the electric chair is going to hum, you might as well go out crackling like a barbecue pit. The food is wheeled in on a tray that wobbles with dignity. You can smell the grease from 10 feet away. That chicken breaded and golden, the steak thick cut and cooked medium rare. The Texas way. The fries are limp from steam, but no one is complaining. And then there's the Dr. Pepper, sweating in its bottle like it knows this is a heavy moment. You sit down and take it in the artificial light buzzing, the cold floor humming faintly beneath your shoes. This isn't fine dining. This is existential dining. Historians still argue whether the American tradition of last meals was meant to humanize the condemned or pacify the public. Either way, it always ends the same silence, shackles, and the scent of fried meat lingering a little too long. Joe eats slowly, not because he's savoring it, but because there's nothing else left to do. It's not like you rush through your last steak. There's a peculiar dignity in the mundane act of chewing. Bite, swallow, sip, exist. The chicken, for all its spice, can't distract from what comes next. The steak is a protest muscle-fighting muscle, even now. And that Dr. Pepper, it fizzes quietly like it's whispering goodbyes. You wonder if the warden takes notes, or if the cook in the back wonders whether his seasoning was too heavy. There are no second chances here. Not for flavor, not for fate. Just a plate, a countdown, and a man pretending this is dinner and not a ritual. And here comes your quirky twist. In 2011, Texas officially ended the last meal request tradition. Why one inmate ordered a mountain of food, 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, a pound of barbecue, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, ice cream, and a slab of peanut butter fudge, and then didn't eat a bite. Lawmakers were unimpressed. You could almost hear the paper napkins being revoked in real time. So now, no more special meals, just standard prison fare. Because apparently, one man's uneaten bacon cheeseburger was the straw that broke the electric chair's dignity. You sit in that chamber, and you think about all the steaks, the pies, the colas, not because they matter, but because they happened. Food is memory. Food is final word. Food is the softest scream a man can make. And now, we reach the final swallow. History has fed you chicken skin, prison toast, French wine, and Dr. Pepper. Each bite more human than the verdict it followed. And in a strange way, they all tasted like the same thing, the end. The tray is empty. The lights are dimmed, somewhere far away. The door closes slowly, and the footsteps fade. The smell of fried chicken still lingers, as if memory itself is slow to leave the room. You exhale, and the silence settles like a soft sheet over everything we've just revisited. You didn't think history would whisper like this through food, of all things. But here we are, full of uneasy details and quiet rituals. It wasn't the gallows or the guillotine that told their stories best. It was the steak, the soda, the soup spoon clinking gently against a chipped bowl. So, if your eyes feel heavy now, that's okay. Let them. You've digested more than facts. You've tasted the humanity beneath the headlines. The ordinary moments that still found space between extraordinary punishments. Let it all riff now. The meals, the men, the last slow chews of time. Let your breath ease. The night is quiet. Sleep is near. Now, we begin with a steaming bowl of broth and the faint sound of drums in the distance. Paris smells like fear and unwashed hair, and the revolution is in full swing. You're standing inside a dim stone cell with none other than Louis XVI, yes, the monarch whose head is on a rather tight schedule. He's hunched over a bowl of boiled chicken, surrounded not by gold or courtiers, but by silence and a crusty wooden spoon. You would never think that the man who once hosted Versailles banquets now struggles to swallow poultry that could double as bathwater. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where my sleepy little history gang is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift your weight against the stone wall. The cold creeps in through your shoes, or lack thereof, and you notice that the king's hands tremble as he lifts the spoon. Not much, but enough to betray the layers of wool in ceremony now stripped away. It's January 1793. Outside, the people chant his name, not with love, but with that familiar French passion for drama and decapitation. He's chosen a final meal of boiled chicken, some bread, and a bit of weak red wine, nothing more. No feast, no multi-course extravaganza, just a peasant's dinner from a king's broken kitchen. Historians still argue whether Louis ate every bite or if he simply stared into the broth, searching for answers the revolution never gave him. And you're stuck watching it, wondering whether to admire his restraint or feel secondhand embarrassment for the blandness of it all. There's a certain comic paradox to it. A man who once employed a team of chefs for his dog, now settling for meat boiled into oblivion. At this point, even the chicken looks ashamed. A priest murmurs a prayer beside him, more out of routine than hope. The bread crumbles like the monarchy, dry and uninspired. You take a whiff, no spices. Salt was a luxury. And let's be honest, no one's seasoning anything on execution day. This is France, after all, but not the tasty part, and somewhere, deep in that irony-scented air, a soldier adjusts the cuffs on his uniform. Bored, the guillotine waits, blades polished to shine like divine judgment. It was designed to be humane. If by humane, you mean fast, loud, and headless in under 5 seconds. Dr. Guillotin would be proud historians still argue whether his invention was truly merciful or just faster theater. You try not to stare at the wine. It's the only thing with color. Louis drinks it slowly, savoring its mediocrity. There's something painfully modern about this. A man denied a throne, choosing to finish his glass instead of his life. No tantrum, no begging, just a sip, a sigh, and the kind of silence that even revolutions respect. A bell tolls. He stands, wiping his mouth like a man who's just finished lunch at a rural cafe. Not a condemned prisoner in the center of Europe's loudest uprising. His plate remains, a quiet witness to a monarchy undone, not by battles, but by bread prices, and a very angry crowd. You follow as guards lead him away, one hand holding his coat shut against the wind. And for a moment, just a flicker, You wonder if the chicken was worth it. Probably not. But history isn't always a banquet. Sometimes, it's just a bowl of soggy meat and a date with gravity. You barely have time to rinse the taste of Revolution-era broth from your thoughts before you're whisked 2 centuries and 1 ocean away. It's 1963, and Texas humidity clings to your skin like guilt on a linen suit. You sit across from a man with heavy eyelids and a buzz cut so neat it might as well be carved. His name is Timothy McVeigh, and he's ordering his final meal like it's fast food, because it is. French fries, 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream, no entree, no wine, no solemnity, just frozen sugar and starch, eaten in the shadow of a federal death warrant. The good news, it's cold. The bad news, so is the room. You'd think the state might spring for a tablecloth or some candles, but no. The stainless steel tray echoes with cafeteria loneliness, and no one says grace over mint ice cream. You lean against the wall, which smells like ammonia and old promises. A guard clears his throat. The fluorescent light buzzes like a mosquito trapped in bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether McVeigh's dessert-only order was a final jab at the system or simply a last indulgence. But either way, it's hard to look dignified while your spoon clicks against a styrofoam cup of Edie's. There's something gloriously anticlimactic about it. America's most infamous domestic terrorist choosing a toddler's dream treat before meeting his maker. Now, we slip back into the flickering candlelight of a smoky medieval cottage, thick air scented with mildew, pig, and something vaguely resembling turnips. The rafters creak overhead, though the building itself doesn't seem entirely convinced it wants to keep standing. Outside, the night wind howls like a banshee trying out for the town choir. Inside, all eyes are on you, yes. You because it's your wedding night. And surprise, half the village is here to watch. You would never think that lying down on a lumpy straw mattress could legally bind you to someone for life. But in medieval Europe, that was more binding than most actual paperwork. That's right, getting into bed together in front of witnesses was often more important than a ring, a sermon, or even love. In some regions, especially among the peasant classes, the bedding ceremony was less about privacy and more about public accountability. Because nothing says romance like your future father-in-law nodding in approval while you tuck yourself in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're cozy in bed already, drop your current location and local time in the comments. Just don't doze off mid-comment. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel onto what's generously called a bed. It's straw, damp in places, with something crunchy you don't want to identify. Your mattress might be shared tomorrow with chickens or cousins, but tonight, it's yours, and everyone is waiting for you to climb in. Your spouse-to-be lies beside you, equally mortified, dressed in a nightgown that smells faintly of cabbage and candle wax. In some communities, the officiating priest would bless the bed before you got in, making sure God was spiritually, if awkwardly, present for your big moment. Other times, villagers would sing mildly threatening songs about fidelity while physically tucking you both in. It's like karaoke with consequences. Once under the covers, which may or may not be stolen, you lie stiff as the church pews, trying not to make eye contact with the baker's wife, who is still watching from the corner. Fortunately, no one expects actual consummation yet, though rest assured, someone will ask for details over porridge tomorrow. This entire custom served as both a form of public marriage and a social contract. The bedding wasn't just symbolic, it was legal. And depending on your town's traditions, refusal to share the bed after the ceremony could annul the whole affair. Romantic, isn't it? Mainstream historians agree that this tradition helped enforce community cohesion and regulate relationships in an age without mass literacy or central registries. But fringe theories suggest some villages turned the event into a semi-festival, complete with ale, roasted turnips, and a betting pool on who would fall asleep first. One historical record from 14th century Friesland even describes a rogue pig joining the betting ceremony and being mistaken for the bride's dowry. An honest mistake, given the lighting. And yes, historians still argue whether these customs were about protecting women's rights or reinforcing patriarchal control. On one hand, a public marriage meant accountability. On the other, it meant zero privacy, lifelong expectations, and a commitment cemented between bedbugs and nosy neighbors. So as you lie there, bundled in scratchy wool and existential dread, consider this: your entire life just changed in front of the town butcher, the blacksmith, and that one uncle who smells like boiled leeks. Sleep tight. You wake not with sunlight on your face, but with someone's elbow in your ribs and the sound of chickens squabbling under the bed frame. It's your first morning as a married person, which means, according to tradition, you'll now be monitored for productivity, obedience, and whether you can churn butter without threatening divorce. Congratulations. Your new life begins with a hearty breakfast of thin porridge and silence, maybe a heel of yesterday's rye if you're lucky, which is so dry it could be repurposed as structural timber. You and your spouse share a wooden bowl because that's romantic, and because it's the only one in the house. The room still smells of last night's festivities, stale ale, feet, and a faint whiff of someone's medicinal goat poultice. In many medieval homes, the newlyweds didn't live alone. Privacy was a luxury for lords in their dramatically curtained beds. For the average couple, your private space is a sleeping alcove built into the kitchen wall, shared with at least one grandparent and sometimes an orphaned cousin who just kind of moved in. You don't so much live alone as you perform daily life in a live studio audience of family and farm animals. This isn't a honeymoon. This is boot camp for shared survival and your first duty as a medieval spouse. Work, so much work. If you're the wife, you rise at dawn to bake bread, feed livestock, and make sure the baby hasn't crawled into the fireplace again. If you're the husband, you're out in the fields, breaking your back to harvest someone else's grain. Married life is less happily ever after, and more, you now get to collapse next to someone equally exhausted. There's a peculiar tradition in some northern villages on the first morning after marriage. Neighbors drop by uninvited, poke their heads into your bed nook, and ask cheerfully, "Well, how was it?" You smile and say something vaguely positive while mentally drafting your list of people to never speak to again. Some historians call this community reinforcement of the marital bond. Others call it what it is: nosy. And then there's the bed itself, a marvel of medieval engineering, built with 4 creaky legs and 3 functional straw ropes, which stretch and sag like your expectations. You're supposed to rebuild this every few months by tightening the ropes, hence the phrase, sleep tight. And by tight, we mean hope you don't fall through to the dirt floor. Quirky fact, some medieval beds had built-in lids to keep in heat, effectively turning your mattress into a human bread oven. Cozy until someone farts, and then it's less warmth-sharing intimacy and more chemical warfare in a confined box. Historians still debate whether the communal sleep experience made couples closer or simply better at tolerating each other. There's evidence for both. On one hand, you're forced to communicate. On the other, you learn to argue in whispers while pretending to sleep. Passive-aggressive sighing may have medieval origins. You roll out of bed, careful not to step on the dog, and start your life as a married medieval human. It's not a fairy tale, but at least you're both equally sleep-deprived, itchy, and mildly lactose intolerant. Ah, love. Midnight. The fire's embers crackle faintly, casting a dull glow on your woolen nightcap. The cottage is quiet aside from that one cow who snores like a bagpipe being stepped on. You and your spouse lie side by side, separated by a respectable 3 inches of straw, because physical affection is sweet, but body odor is medieval reality. Now enters one of the strangest customs of the era: bundling. Yes, bundling. The practice of sewing or binding two people into bed together, fully clothed, sometimes with a wooden board between them, so they can get to know each other without the temptation of improper warmth. Picture a human burrito with a chastity clause, though it sounds like a scene from a Monty Python sketch. Bundling was once a semi-official step toward courtship and marriage, especially among the lower classes in Northern Europe. Parents would bundle two young people, usually at night, and then just leave them there. Supervised flirtation at its finest. And you thought Tinder was awkward? The theory was noble. Let potential spouses talk intimately while physically restrained, sort of like emotional hostage negotiation. But of course, historians still argue whether bundling ever stayed as innocent as advertised. Some records suggest couples would untie each other the second the candles were out. Others imply it was a sort of test if the girl got pregnant. Well, now they had to get married. Problem solved. Ish. In certain parts of Wales and Scotland, they took it even further. Enter the courting stick, a hollow stick passed between lovers lying in separate beds across the room. They whispered through it, like a medieval phone line, except one with no privacy and terrible acoustics. Romantic, sort of. Efficient. Absolutely not. Meanwhile, in Dutch communities, bundling was sometimes enforced with literal bundling bags, cloth sacks that tied at the neck and knees, like a straitjacket made by a loving grandmother. You were allowed to cuddle, maybe even kiss, but anything more? Not unless you wanted your mother bursting in with a lantern and moral outrage. There's one fringe account from a 1700s diary in Yorkshire that describes a particularly rebellious pair who cut slits in the side of their bundling board so they could hold hands in secret. Scandalous. Also, adorable. Also, probably a splinter hazard. And yet, there's reason to believe bundling did serve a social purpose. In communities without inns or guest rooms, traveling suitors had to sleep somewhere, and bundling gave parents a way to manage that without losing their minds. It was about preserving virtue, but also conserving space. Romance on a budget. Still, you lie there now, wrapped like a leftover sausage, wondering how you got into this situation. Your spouse exhales audibly. You inch closer. The board creaks a warning. Better to stay on your side. No one wants to explain broken boards to Grandma. Sleep well, lovebirds. You wake up groggy, limbs stiff, with a faint sense that you've been gently marinating in your own sweat. The air smells like damp hay, boiled cabbage, and someone's left foot. It's barely dawn, but you're already dressed because, let's be honest, you sleep in the same wool tunic you wear all day. And tonight, your in-laws are visiting, which means only one thing: the bedding ceremony. Yes, the bedding ceremony. A delightful tradition where your entire village, or at least your nearest and nosiest relatives, escort you and your new spouse to bed on your wedding night. This is not symbolic. This is literal. You walk to bed, led by a trail of giggling aunts and well-meaning uncles, while your neighbors throw nuts and flowers and maybe the odd turnip for good luck. Once there, you're helped into your shared sleeping space again. Actual help. As if you're too emotionally stunned to find the blanket yourself. Occasionally, a clergyman would say a short prayer. Sometimes, the guests would sing a bawdy song. And then, with all the grace of a dinner theater exit, the crowd files out, leaving you blinking in the firelight, alone with your new spouse and approximately 12 generations of expectations. Historians still argue whether the tradition was about solemnity or spectacle. In some regions, it truly was sacred, an act meant to invoke fertility and good fortune. In others, it was more like group hazing disguised as holy matrimony. Either way, few modern couples would appreciate a cousin lighting the bedside candle while asking, "So, you nervous now?" If you were nobility, things got even more dramatic. Royal bedding ceremonies often included signed documents to confirm the couple had successfully made it to bed. No one stayed for the act itself, thankfully, but the pressure was enough to make performance anxiety a multi-generational curse. There's one recorded case of a 17th century French duke who, after being ceremonially undressed in front of his entire household, promptly fainted before reaching the mattress. His wedding was considered legally binding. His pride, however, was not. In contrast, peasants often combined the bedding ceremony with feasting, drinking, and storytelling. By the time the couple was escorted to their straw mattress, they were so full of ale and root vegetables that consummation was more aspirational than guaranteed. There are folk songs joking about the broom that did more sweeping than the groom. If you catch the drift, one quirky tidbit from rural Germany: some guests would sneak into the newlyweds' room afterward, not to spy, but to steal their shoes. This was thought to ensure fertility, or maybe just inconvenience them into staying in bed. Either way, you wake up barefoot, married, and slightly traumatized. And here you are now, sharing your lumpy straw mattress with a brand new spouse and the echoes of last night's awkward applause. Sleep is patchy, dreams are strange, and somewhere in the dark, you vow that if you ever have children, you'll let them get married quietly, maybe even in private. Imagine that. The first thing you notice when you wake up again, besides your newly assigned marital status, is that your blanket has mysteriously wandered halfway off the bed. Or maybe it was never large enough to begin with. Medieval couples didn't have the luxury of queen-size duvets or orthopedic mattresses. You share a hay-stuffed sack on a wooden platform that creaks dramatically every time one of you breathes. And then there's the matter of sleeping positions. Now, you'd assume that in a culture obsessed with bedding ceremonies and family gossip, there'd be a formal guide to post-wedding sleep etiquette. Spoiler alert, there isn't. You lie rigidly on your side, acutely aware of every joint, and the presence of your partner's elbow somewhere near your spine. The room is pitch dark, lit only by the faint orange glow of cooling embers, and the air smells of wax, wool, and, is that onion? One widely accepted norm was that couples, especially those just married, should sleep with a space between them on the first few nights to allow for modesty, cooling off period, or a healthy fear of medieval contraceptive failure. But this wasn't always practical. Beds weren't exactly generous. You didn't roll over, you rolled into someone. Here's a fun paradox: you may be newly married, but sleeping fully clothed was standard. That itchy wool tunic stays on, partly for warmth, partly for modesty, and partly because it's the only one you own. And yes, the idea of changing into fresh pajamas is charming. But unless you've recently won a crusade or married into a mercantile dynasty, you sleep in the same thing you work in. Sleepwear is a 19th century luxury. Another historical quirk: bed sharing wasn't just a marital thing. In many lower-class households, beds were shared communally by siblings, relatives, or even farmhands. So in some villages, you might go from sleeping with your cousin to sleeping with your spouse, all in the same bed frame, just repositioned, slightly left. In wealthier homes, separate beds, or even separate chambers, eventually became more popular. Not because of personal space, but for status. If you could afford separate sleeping quarters, you had arrived, and no one had to hear you snore. Historians still argue whether this shift was driven more by hygiene, social mobility, or just the escalating irritation of someone hogging the coverlet. But throughout much of medieval Europe, the shared bed was an anchor of life. It symbolized unity, economy, and the unavoidable intimacy of surviving winter in a stone building without insulation. In fact, bed fellowship had legal implications. Sharing a bed with someone of the opposite sex, even without a wedding, could be used as evidence of an unofficial marriage, which is problematic if you're just crashing after too much cider. Some couples developed elaborate etiquette around sleeping. For instance, one obscure 15th century French guidebook suggests that a husband should lie closest to the wall to protect the wife from drafts and wolves. Modern scholars believe the wolf comment was symbolic, but just in case, you scoot over a little closer to the center. So here you are, married, modestly dressed, stiff, itchy, possibly lying on a walnut. Your spouse murmurs something unintelligible and shifts away. You lie still, feeling a thread of straw poke through the blanket and into your leg. Romance may be overrated, but survival, that's the real bonding agent. You're barely rested when the sun begins to leak through the wooden slats in the wall, dragging you out of your deeply unsatisfying, blanket-deficient slumber in medieval Europe. Morning isn't heralded by a gentle chime or lo-fi playlist. It arrives with the unmistakable clatter of livestock, the shuffling of in-laws in the same room, and the smell of someone already boiling onions for breakfast. No one asks how your first night of marriage went. They assume you survived. Good enough. Now, we move into a charming custom called the morning gift. It sounds like it could be a croissant or maybe a back massage. But no, it's a legally binding asset transfer. The husband, ever the romantic, gives the wife a present the morning after their first night together land. Livestock, or if you're lucky, a whole cow. Not metaphorical, not poetic. A literal cow? Forget diamonds. Medieval girls knew the value of dairy. The morning gift wasn't just a sweet gesture. It was protection. In a society where women were mostly considered someone's daughter, someone's wife, or someone's problem, a morning gift could serve as a form of insurance, something to fall back on if the marriage turned into a disaster, or your new husband took a sudden interest in crusading and never came back. Historians still argue whether this practice was rooted in genuine affection, legal tradition, or a desperate attempt to make up for the hay-stuffed bed. And now comes the parade. Not metaphorical this time either. In some parts of England and Northern Europe, newlyweds were escorted publicly from their home the next day, faces pink, eyes bloodshot, to show everyone the deal was sealed. A literal walk of fame. Except no one's clapping, and you're still adjusting your tunic. Your neighbors cheer, not because they care about your emotional connection, but because marriage means alliances, inheritances, and possibly another excuse for ale later in the week. One particularly uncomfortable tradition is the inspection of the bridal sheets. Yes, someone actually checks them. Sometimes the mother-in-law, sometimes the entire village. In some Germanic regions, it wasn't enough to know you said you were married. They wanted proof. Soiled linen meant honor. Unsullied sheets meant gossip, annulments, and a long winter of side-eye from Aunt Gertrude. You fold your blanket carefully, pretending not to notice the overly interested glances from the older women gathered near the hearth. Someone nods. Good. The marriage is real. And so is your next task breakfast with your new extended family, most of whom are already loudly discussing when the first child will arrive. For context, it's not even 7 a.m. You sit at a roughly hewn table, sharing barley bread and onion broth with your spouse, who is now officially your workmate, bedmate, legal partner, and designated bearer of mutual disappointment during rainy seasons. There's no such thing as a honeymoon, unless you count milking cows while someone criticizes your posture. Still, there is something oddly comforting about this. You've entered a new phase of life, and despite the hay, the public scrutiny, and the ceremonial loss of personal space, you're part of something bigger, a household, a lineage, a never-ending cycle of weddings, births, and household chores. The morning gift. It turns out to be a small patch of land behind the barn, muddy, lumpy, and slightly cursed by folklore. But it's yours. And in the 14th century, that's about as romantic as it gets. You'd think that after a medieval wedding, a night of socially policed sleeping, and a morning gift with questionable resale value, you'd get a day off. Maybe relax, pet a goat. No. Welcome to married life in medieval Europe, where rest is a concept reserved exclusively for the deceased and the nobility. You and your new spouse begin your first day as a married unit by tackling the exciting world of household division. And by division, we mean a seamless blend of crushing labor and passive-aggressive silence. You fetch water often from a well down the lane or, if luck fails, from the river your neighbors also use for washing, rinsing, and possibly dyeing. Your spouse tends to chickens, shovels dung, or tries to stop the pig from escaping. Romance is in the air. If air means the thick smell of fermented cabbage and livestock anxiety, domestic life is teamwork, but not the cute kind you see in modern rom-coms, in medieval terms. It means building mutual survival through chores that never end. You bake bread in a communal oven with other wives, while your husband repairs the roof using tools that look suspiciously like sticks. There's no privacy, no weekends, and certainly no therapy. If you're upset, you air grievances through interpretive sighing while scrubbing root vegetables. But let's talk about beds again, because beds are a whole thing. They don't just belong to you. Oh no. If you're from a poorer household, you're still sleeping in a room with several others, including your parents, younger siblings, and possibly a hired laborer who pays rent and goat feed. Your mattress remains a stuffed sack of hay, and pillow talk involves discussing crop rotation strategies until you both pass out from sheer exhaustion. And now comes the extended guest phase. In some regions, particularly in Scandinavia, it was customary for relatives to remain with you for several days after the wedding. Not just stopping by, staying, sharing meals, observing your every interaction like unpaid reality show producers. Historians still argue whether this custom was about reinforcing family bonds or just a clever way for aunts to monitor fertility outcomes without being asked. Then there's the issue of first sleep and second sleep. Yes, medieval sleep wasn't continuous. After going to bed, soon after sundown, people often woke up in the middle of the night for a stretch of wakeful hours, a kind of natural intermission. During this time, you and your spouse might chat, pray, do light chores, or contemplate your life choices while staring at the ceiling and listening to the neighbor snore through the wall. If intimacy happens, it happens during the strange in-between period. If not, you practice synchronized sighing again. One fringe tidbit. Some newlyweds were subject to a peculiar custom in parts of France called charivari, a mock serenade by neighbors using pots, pans, and loud chants to disrupt the couple's sleep, often as a way to express disapproval of the match. Imagine getting married only to be ambushed by a medieval kazoo band at 1 a.m. Because apparently, marriage isn't stressful enough. Still, there's comfort in routine. As you sweep ashes from the hearth, someone hands you a bundle of fresh herbs to hang over the bed, meant to bring fertility, luck, and keep demons at bay. You nod politely, knowing full well that the only thing in that room haunting you tonight will be the sound of your own back cracking. And so begins your journey. Day 1, done. 8,000 more to go. It's now a few weeks into your newlywed life, and the romance has, let's say, settled. You've memorized each other's straw bed creaks. You know exactly who snores like a broken windmill, and you've seen your spouse try to swat fleas in their sleep using nothing but a sigh of despair. But tonight's topic is a little spicier, well, as spicy as medieval sleep customs allow. Because now, it's time to talk about, brace yourself, how society, religion, and suspicion all shared your bed with you, literally and metaphorically. Remember how marriage in medieval Europe wasn't exactly a private affair? Well, that continues indefinitely, even in the bedroom. The church kept a very long nose. You and your spouse might have a priest in your village reminding you of the correct times and permissible positions for marital relations. Certain days were off-limits Fridays, Sundays, feast days, fasting days, saint days, days ending in Y, and basically any time joy might accidentally sneak in. Historians still argue whether these strictures were more about control or simply the church trying to regulate every human function like a cosmic hall monitor. Now, if that sounds awkward, don't worry, it gets worse. Let's say your spouse starts sleep talking. Normally, not a big deal. But in some parts of England and Central Europe, whispering names or phrases in your sleep could be taken as a sign of witchcraft or adultery. People were tried in court for supposedly summoning demons between snores. So yes, you had to be careful not only when you were awake, but also while unconscious. Talk about performance pressure. And if you think dream interpretation today is full of crystals and vague metaphors, medieval folks had their own spicy takes. Dreaming of dirty water could be a sign of impure thoughts. Dreaming of flying, likely consorting with dark forces. Dreaming of eating cheese, probably just cheese, but someone's going to make it weird. One quirky fact in some villages, dreams were considered grounds for annulment, especially if it involved visions of an ex-lover or saints wagging their fingers at you. So yeah, cheat on your spouse in a dream, and you might find yourself single before dawn. Let's pivot to bed-sharing etiquette. You're married, but the idea of a private bed is still a fantasy for most commoners. You sleep with family, sometimes servants, sometimes random travelers, if you're running an inn or farmstead, a fun group event. Really, there were rules. Though feet point outward, hands above the blanket unless you want to slap, and no suspicious rustling. If you thought bunk beds were awkward, imagine lying next to your brother-in-law while trying to flirt with your spouse using Morse code toe taps. As for bedding upgrades, you probably won't get much more than an extra blanket and a bag of feathers if you're lucky, unless you're rich. And then you get a curtained bed, which, let's be honest, is mostly there to muffle the endless gossip of the household. Oh, and remember, the first sleep-second sleep rhythm. That little intermission period is now prime time for midnight prayers, or complaints about the pigs, or blaming your spouse for whatever dream you just had. There's no better time for marital bonding than when the stars are out. The wind is howling through the cracks, and your bladder's full, but the chamber pot is missing. Welcome to intimacy, medieval style, filtered through religion, paranoia, dreams, and a thick layer of straw. Eventually, of course, all things must end, even long medieval nights filled with suspicion, straw, and semi-public marital snoring. And so we arrive at the final scene of your newlywed sleep saga, the delicate matter of sleep, as proof, or lack thereof, of consummation. Ah, yes, the awkward political pressure of dozing off correctly. You see, in many parts of medieval Europe, especially among nobles or land-owning families, your first night as a married couple wasn't quite your own. The marriage bed might be observed, literally, sometimes by witnesses behind curtains, other times by enthusiastic relatives standing in the corner holding candles in judgment. Why? Because whether or not the couple actually sealed the deal could determine property, alliances, or royal succession. Romance at its finest. It was called bedding the bride, and in some cases, the whole village turned up. You'd be paraded to the bedchamber, occasionally serenaded by crude jokes, mild drumming, or, if you were lucky, some ale-fueled chants. Then they'd close the curtains, and the pressure was on. Scholars still argue whether this was all symbolic theater or if someone actually checked the sheets the next morning. Spoiler, both happened, because medieval logic was never content with choosing just one terrible option. If you failed to prove consummation, no stains, no blushes, or simply too much whispering and not enough effort annulment could follow. So yes, your sleep could literally determine your marital future, inheritance rights, or whether your in-laws would ever look you in the eye again. For peasant couples, the stakes were a bit lower, but even then, gossip about whether a couple had done the deed could affect your standing in the community. Did she limp the next day? Was he whistling while gathering firewood? Inquiring minds wanted to know. Marriage wasn't just a private union. It was a social performance with ongoing reviews. And if your spouse died shortly after the wedding, before the marriage had been fulfilled, you might find yourself in hot water again. Inheritance denied, land rights revoked, emotional support. Oh no, you're suspected of witchcraft now. Because, of course, sleep wasn't just rest, it was evidence. Testimony, a nightly trial. One twitch could betray you. One awkward silence could be your undoing. And God forbid you fall asleep too fast, clearly a sign of disinterest or poison. On the rare occasion that you were left alone with your partner, the medieval marriage bed wasn't even that comfortable. The lice were still present. The fleas didn't respect marriage vows. And privacy, true privacy, was basically a myth you read about in illuminated manuscripts, likely between illustrations of saints looking disappointed. Even death didn't guarantee rest. Widows might be asked intrusive questions, especially if their husband passed in his sleep. Was it natural? Was it cursed? Had she been whispering over him at night again? Historians still debate whether this suspicion stemmed from religious superstition or just small-town boredom with a dash of misogyny. So finally, you sleep. The medieval candle gutters. Your straw mattress groans beneath you. Somewhere in the shadows, a dog coughs. You roll onto your back and close your eyes, surrounded by the weight of 1,000 customs, expectations, whispers, and possibly your cousin snoring nearby. And that, dear listener, is how marriage and sleep waltzed awkwardly together across the drafty floorboards of medieval life.